This is a story of how I faced a bully and quit my job. As always, I invite you to draw with me as I recreate this dancer, and the feeling I was trying to capture in this picture comes from this exact series of events that unfolded those 23 years ago when I was working in that Starbucks. This also connects to new work that I'm creating under the title Unspoken, which is all about body language and human behavior. I find that really super interesting. Maybe I should have been a little alarmed when my boss called the basement the torture chamber. I had just finally been able to get a job. I had moved to London with a group of 5 people, and it had been quite difficult for me to get a job. I'd found the whole process super stressful, and I was running out of money. I needed the job real bad. So I finally had taken my pretty unimpressive little CV out and walked around Covent Garden, handing it into restaurants and cafes there. And amazingly, I managed to get an interview and a job. At first, I thought things were kind of okay. The manager seemed to be this young man in his late 20s, early 30s. I thought he seemed like a cool guy at the time. But I soon started to see some red flags, and I realized he wasn't a pleasant person at all. I had a young co-worker there, very young. He was a creative guy. I'm pretty sure he might have been a dancer. His name was AJ, and he was working there at the time. And I started noticing this manager would single him out and be really demeaning and unkind. I really had the feeling he was trying to break AJ's spirit, and there was a word for what I saw. It was pretty clearly bullying. I didn't like it, and unfortunately, I would soon find myself to be next in line. I don't know exactly what triggered it or what happened, but my boss just started to become more and more hostile towards me. He would come down really hard if I made any mistakes. It would be a merciless telling off, a berating, something that would send me right back into childhood. The feeling of being a kid in trouble was awful. This was my first job in London, and I didn't really have a great confidence for starters, but this really started grading my confidence down. I felt it disintegrating bit by bit. He became increasingly harsh towards me, and he would conduct randomized audits on my till to check if I was stealing. And I would have to bring my till back to his office in the middle of the day. It was humiliating to be dragged out like that in front of all of my co-workers. And I was terrified when I was counting up the cash with him watching my every move. And I was so scared that I would have made any mistakes, such as having too little or too much money in my till, because obviously the intention was clear. He was making me feel like a thief, and God help me if I had any deficit or worse, surplus, which could indicate fraud on my part. Thankfully, he couldn't find any issues, even though I know it would have been his greatest pleasure if he had. The bullying continued, and I knew I was being scrutinized. Every day I became increasingly more nervous, and as that happened, so did the frequency of my mistakes. I would drop things, forget things, and make more and more little mistakes all the time. I even experienced on occasion, started to have the sense of an inner alarm going off before Arno would enter the room. It was as if my survival mechanism got fine-tuned to his frequency, and I had the sense of dread that went before his presence. I know it sounds a bit odd, but I remember one occasion where this particular flavor of dread came upon me while I was refilling the coffee machine with beans, and just as I had this sense of dread that started to manifest, Arno entered the room behind me and spotted me accidentally refilling decaf beans into the wrong container. This whole dance of intimidation and fear culminated one day when Arno instructed us we all needed to change our habit of how we were addressing the crowds of people gathering at breakfast and lunch rushes. We needed to stop calling out who's next, and we needed to start greeting people with a hello or a hi, who's next. So when I, out of habit, blurted out, "Who's next?" in Arno's presence, he was furious. He called me to his office, where I was berated for an extended amount of time for my rebellion and my refusing to cooperate. I tried to communicate the fact that it was a habitual "who's next" and there was no rebellion on my part, but Arno would have none of it. I was in pieces when I came home to my flat that day. My friends that I'd moved to London with all gathered around me and they said, "This is unacceptable. You need to leave this situation." And if any of you guys are out there listening right now, Greta, Tore, Kat, Elizabeth, this was one of the most liberating acts of kindness that I have ever been on the receiving end of. And I love you all for it. These most marvelous of people all unanimously agreed they would cover my rent and back me up completely so I could leave this wretched job and take the time I needed to find another one. I remember that feeling of hope while having a cheeky cigarillo and a beer with Tore, the gentle giant of our flat. I never forget the look of anticipation on his face. It was a mix of kindness and glee as we raised our beer bottles to the future to celebrate my freedom that night. The journey to work next day was an entirely new experience. How often do you get on public transport with the sole purpose of telling your boss your true feelings about him and walking out without staying for the remainder of your contracted notice period? I practiced in my head how I was going to deliver this message. My heart was pounding as I walked through the familiar doors in this little Covent Garden Starbucks, and I was greeted by the smell of coffee and croissants. I took a deep breath and proceeded to Arno's dingy little windowless office where I had spent so many anxious hours counting up my till. I found Arno there and gathered up all my courage. The look on his face was utter surprise. I think the scenario was so unexpected, he just had nothing to reply. I told him I was quitting and I was not going to spend another moment in his store. I explained that I didn't mind the co-workers, making coffee or cleaning, but my reason for leaving was him and him alone. He had made life miserable and I kindly let him know I thought he needed to be more encouraging. I was very even-keeled, probably a bit monotonous delivering my message. I wasn't angry. My anger was eclipsed by joy and the smell of freedom was so tangible. I turned around and walked out. Here's a little message to let you know that I have got a new print in my shop called Spirited. And this one is about reconnecting to that divine part of yourself where you know you are worthy, you are loved, and you are more than what meets the eye. So if this connects with you at all, I would love to encourage you to head over to my shop. It's available globally and right now there's a 30% off. The sun warmed my face and I wanted to dance and jump around right then and there. I didn't on the outside, however. I was dancing in spirit all the way through Covent Garden, passing the Royal Ballet, crossing the Strand and walking across the bridge at Embankment. I walked all the way from Covent Garden to Tate Modern and went up to the top where the cafe was overlooking the cityscape and the River Thames. My heart was still dancing. As I'm recollecting the string of events, I feel this gratitude for having had this experience and so grateful for the friends that helped me get out of this sticky situation. But the story doesn't end here. After this event, the reality started setting in. I needed a job and now I had to start over. With my confidence still in tatters, I couldn't deny I had become more and more deficient as a worker in Starbucks. My many mistakes were coloring my feelings of competency. I felt if I can't hold down a job making coffee, what can I do with my life? Forget about dreams. I badly needed to recover my sense of self after this experience. So I took a break, got a cheap flight to Denmark and had a break in my childhood home with my parents and my elder sister. Now, as I've shared here before, I grew up in a home of the Christian faith. At this time, there was a kind of spiritual awakening going on in my home, and particularly for my older sister. She'd always been a little bit different, like I have, but at this point she was starting to receive messages from God quite frequently. Well, the divine must have seen the state I was in, so there was a message. This was not something I've tried before or since. The content of the message my sister delivered on behalf of the divine was following. You're not going to have to look for work. There's going to be someone who will get in touch with you and you will be given a job. You will be hired without the normal interview process. I thought this message was extraordinary. It came through loud and clear, and it was very comforting. I also felt I had absolutely no strength in me to go out and present myself to employers. I was amazed when the miracle happened. I think I had about 10 days in Denmark, and while I was there, I started getting messages from my friend Elizabeth, one of these amazing 4 people who had backed me up in my moments of despair. Well, first Elizabeth said a manager she had worked for was looking for someone to work in her cafe. This was also a Starbucks. Now, Starbucks was the very last place on my list of job opportunities, so I thought, nice, but no thanks. But the message changed. This store manager has now decided she wants you. She says you don't have to do an interview. She has made up her mind. She just wants you, and you can come in and sign the papers. I was astonished. Even though I did not want to go back to Starbucks, I did. And this turned out to be a very healing experience. The manager in this place was an Italian woman named Frederica. She was full of kindness and joy. She welcomed me in her shop. She had had to have special permission to hire me due to my walking away from the other store. I asked her one morning, "What made you do this? Why me? Why did you hire me?" She said she couldn't explain it. She just had a really strong intuition about it. And of course, that she loved Elizabeth, so she knew if I was a friend of Elizabeth's, I could be trusted. I remember as I would come in to start my 7 a.m. morning shift, she would insist on making me my favorite coffee and have me sit down and enjoy with a line of customers all the way to the door. I found my confidence little by little working for Frederica. She promoted me, she made me coffee master and district coffee master. She made me supervisor, and finally I even managed the shop for a while as she was promoted to a bigger store. A funny little twist at the end. Now that I had got promoted, I had to take part in a conference for managers and coffee masters. Well, fate would have it, or perhaps the divine one watching over me, that I would meet Arno one last time. I was at this conference, and for some reason there was a football in the hallway. So I remember running down the hall with my friends, kicking this ball, laughing and playing, and then suddenly, before me, there was Arno. He was very surprised to see me. He thought I had been banned from working at Starbucks due to my walking out that day. But I guess someone above might have been trying to make a point. That's how it felt anyway. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little drawing session and the little life experience that I have shared with you here. I just want to say thank you so much for watching this. If you like this content, do subscribe and hit some buttons for me, because that's so extremely helpful. Anything you have to say is greatly appreciated. Your comments have been kind of the fuel for this channel, so yeah. Thanks again for watching. Take care, all the best.